the evidence-based practice movement, personified in the work of the Institute of Education Sciences, which I was on the governing board for a number of years, just came off. And its logic is something like what I've sketched out. It's a little bit of a caricature, but somebody has an idea, and that person or small group designs some intervention, and it looks kind of promising, so it goes to, then it's going to go to a larger scale randomized control trial, and these things typically take 5 years. And if they're really lucky, they get evidence that this thing can work. And key word here is can work. Because even with a very well-defined randomized control trial, at its best, that positive effect size, what it's telling us is this thing had to work somewhere for somebody in order to get that positive number. So that's what it tells us. It can work because it did somewhere, okay? And then the logic is, well, then it's going to go from there, and it's going to go over to this group called the What Works Clearinghouse. And they're going to probably take another 12 to 18 months to review this body of evidence. And if they think all the right things have been done, it's going to go on an approved list. And then what's supposed to happen is districts will be required or incented to buy things from this approved list. And if you heard this in the previous talk, if educators implement this initiative with fidelity, voila, practice improves. So this is a kind of working theory of improvement anchored in evidence-based practice. And it's borrowed from healthcare, from particularly the line of healthcare that focuses especially on drug trials, because they tend to look like this. Now, there are a number of problems with this logic, but just at the most basic level, as I said, it's borrowed from healthcare. I had the privilege of being on a Institute of Medicine committee that back a few years ago that focused on what they called a learning healthcare system, how in healthcare they could accelerate learning to improve. And the privilege of being on this committee is I got to see a lot of the working dynamics in healthcare. And one of the things that I learned is that this system right now in education, What Works Clearinghouse, after about 12 years, has got something close to 1,000 entries in it. That's the whole corpus of, quote unquote, what we know. In healthcare, in just 2010 alone, there were 27,000 published clinical trials, 1 year. And this knowledge base has been building for 5 decades. And yet what clinicians will tell you is that upwards about 80% of the practice they engage in, there really is no knowledge base for what to do, because people don't come with one thing. They have medical histories. They have comorbidities. We are different in terms of our genotype, which affects oftentimes how we respond to medical treatment. So in healthcare, they're already moving towards thinking about something. How do you build knowledge that is much more contextually specific? So while this work is worth doing, just that perspective leads you to understand that at no occasion in our lifetime is this actually going to help most schools get better at addressing most of their problems. And one of the issues that sits in our near future is this framework is embedded in the Every Student Succeed Act, that for school turnarounds, they're supposed to buy one of these things. So that's going to be very quite interesting to follow going forward. But so this was another set of ideas. The strength of this ideas, well, go back to the first one. The strength of the performance management ideas was that it got us really focused on student outcomes. It got us to attend to actual variation in outcomes for different subgroups of students. And so we can now more clearly see who education's working for and who it's not. And that may seem like a kind of obvious thing, but it wasn't always so. When we started the consortium around 1990 and was working with Eric, we had the first data from the Chicago public schools, and we did these analyses of breaking down outcomes by racial, ethnic, and gender subgroups. And then there was, and everybody knew there were differences. But now we had the numbers in front of us. And then there were these really long discussions we had to enter into as to whether we should make the numbers public. Because there was this sense that, well, but are we blaming the victims? Is it really unfair to actually make public what have been chronic differences in attainment going back for decades in the Chicago public schools? So in that sense, we've come a long way. We're acknowledging where we're achieving and where we're not. In this work here, I think the strength of it is that it has brought a stronger analytic and empirical perspective into educational research. This work tends to have a stronger theoretical basis to it than just kind of I went to a workshop and I heard a great idea, so I'm going to go try it. So it has brought that, I think, those two things, kind of an analytic and empirical orientation, which I think is a very positive development.